speak. Oh man, what a show. It's man's radio. It's crazy show is on 3 times a week. Now Russ and Phil are there to help with all your cares. We laugh, we cry, we talk like grown-ups do. But if you're sad and low, it won't cost you no dough. And radio, that's the place for you.
With Neil Long. There's no expense spared in the sound department in this place, I can tell you. It has to be said. Well, just in case
absolute genius. I love it.
Isn't it? It's lovely. It's what an intro, I tell you. Oh, I tell you what, it's fantastic, isn't it? Now, I have to tell you that just those of you who may be slightly observant might have noticed that it's not Russ today. We're very privileged. It's Neil instead. Neil, how are you, sir? Good afternoon.
I'm good, thank you. We worked together before, have we, Phil?
I don't think. Do you know what? However long, so both you and I have been on this station. I don't actually think that the both of us have actually done this together. So there you go. So it'll be good. In case you're wondering, Paul Russ has had to go to a funeral today, so he didn't make that any hidden secret as far as I know. But all the same, if he did, it's just been revealed now. But anyway, but all the same, so that is why we have the pleasure of Neil's company today. So I am perfectly sure that the Friday audience will obviously be very welcoming as well. So straight off, by the way, we have quite a few of the older comments coming in. Robert Van Buren, who I'm sure you must know his name. He flies around a fair bit. He says, hello, Neil and Phil. As does Asa Don Brown. Good day, Neil and Phil. Luke Newman, good afternoon, gents. Currently listening whilst writing a sequel to the Mental Health Moles book. Bravo, Luke. Good work. Be as successful as the first.
Very good.
And then we've got that's strange.
Your mum's on the timeline.
Oh no. Oh, it's just me. Hello, mum. I'm on radio. Also, Dave says, greetings, one and all. Now, I know Dave and Russ met up this week, so maybe, Dave, you'll fill us in a bit on that. Dave says, greetings, one and all. The jingle is back. Gotta love Ray, of course, Ray Gelato, who sings that for us. Francine Warner, who is Russ's cousin, is listening. And she also greets my mother, who's named her name is Hips, or her nickname is Hips. So that's what Francine is saying. Elizabeth Green, listening over in New York, says morning. And then I believe that is everyone. Now, Neil, how the devil are you, sir? Because obviously this is sort of a rare treat for us to work together. So.
Well, indeed, yes, we've never had the privilege. I'm good, thank you. I've done one radio show so far today. Then I dropped my mate off to the airport. He's going to Australia for 2 months. The lucky so-and-so.
Gracious me. I mean,
Lucky,
this is. I don't know. I know that we're not here to talk about Australia, but this is one thing that stops me.
Right.
Is I'm not so sure I could deal with being in an aircraft that, because I get quite claustrophobic. And I don't know whether or not it's sort of acceptable or even trendy to even say that you're claustrophobic now, but so much so I won't even go in some lifts because I feel so enclosed in them. And I don't think I could stand the thought of being on an aircraft for that long. The longest I've ever done is to Japan, but that was thank goodness an overnight flight, so I tried to sleep through it. But am I alone here? Am I the only one who's going to be in the sky? Oh,
no, I don't think so. It doesn't bother me particularly, but I know it certainly affects a lot of people. Lisa Janes, hi guys, stay safe in this vile weather, it says. My condolences to Ray on the passing of his mother. Thank you for that, Lisa. So we've got the lovely Chantal today, Screen Queen. She's coming up at 12:30. Should we get our first guest on, Phil?
Well, it'd be rude not to, wouldn't it? Seeing as he's so patiently sitting there in the digital green room and enjoying the digital buffet that's available. So.
It's an amazing digital buffet. I made it all myself.
Yeah.
Greetings, Pat.
Programmed it all yourself.
Welcome to the room. yes, indeed. Those virtual muffins are a thing to behold. Hello, Pat.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm full up on those muffins. They're very tasty.
Excellent stuff. Now, Pat, you're here for I think a very interesting. Sorry, Neil.
No, I think we've got a slight delay thing going on. You go.
There's one heck of a delay thing going on, isn't there? Pat, I was going to say you're here for a very interesting subject today, actually. Sort of when Neil gave me a shout yesterday and told me what it was we were going to chat to you about, I thought this was truly fascinating because it's... Well, I tell you what, how would you explain what you do? Because I don't want to do you a disservice, sir.
No, thank you. Yeah, so I work with comedians and aspiring comedians a lot of the time, and I help them address fear and confidence and self-doubt.
But is it right, Pat, that you don't necessarily have a comic background yourself?
Well, yeah, I mean, I did comedy 20, 30 years ago now as part of my university training, and I worked with Hugh Thomas, the famous, I don't know, Neil, you may be aware of Hugh, but he was the compere at the King's Head in Crouch End for 30 years. And he was great.
I know
teacher.
the name.
Also,
I know the name.
Yeah, comedians who've been around for a long time know Hugh very well. I also worked and still work closely with Tony Allen, who is my good friend and my mentor, really. Tony was one of the pioneers of alternative stand-up comedy. So for the listeners who aren't really aware, up until about 1979, it was people going around telling jokes, and you could tell a joke and your jokes were shared. But then in 1979, it sort of became autobiographical, partly because a lot of people in theatre came into pubs and tried to think, how are we going to make a living, because funding changed. And sort of that was where the revolution in terms of comedy started, in terms of people doing autobiographical material. So my career has been based around taking that essence and working with people to express themselves in that way and use comedy devices, techniques, structures, and so forth.
But don't you think? But don't you think there's something almost slightly oxymoronic about it? Because why would someone decide to become a comedian and then potentially need coaching in how to, how can I put it? I get the need to be coached in sort of a subject that you do, because obviously it's exactly the same way. So like, Neil, I'm sure that you can vouch for this as well. When you work with broadcasters, they don't necessarily know how to broadcast. You need to be able to train them up and work with them and actually get them to a point where they are a competent broadcaster. But I suppose what I'm trying to get at is that why would someone think to themselves, I'm going to go down the route of comedy and yet not necessarily be that confident about standing up in front of people? Do you see what I mean? Because it's kind of like, isn't that part and parcel of the gig?
Comedian, for me, you're absolutely right, Pat. The autobiographical nature of it is very, very true. And I've noticed a lot of comedians' material is about the struggles, the self-doubt, the negative things, which they kind of almost use as a catharsis to feel better. So there's certainly a mental health angle as well. We've lost Phil slightly. Actually, Pat, before we go any further, tell me your website and I'll stick it on.
Only whilst I clean the pipes. I didn't think it was very nice to blow one's nose on screen.
Good question. Good question about the website. You can currently find me on Facebook and my Gmail, thepatwelsh@gmail.com. My website's in development because this is quite a new adventure for me. I left higher education after 20 years of working in higher education, and I'm now working. I've always worked with comedians on various levels, mainly people starting out, but also I'm working with people who are developing. And the website's been built. But the thing that's changed for me really is the coaching. And the coaching, I heard you talking earlier about the sort of leadership styles in industry and so forth. And that's coaching has really opened the door to me. And it's about asking questions and helping people with confidence through that, and finding out, your previous guest mentioned limiting beliefs. And I don't know if that's common vernacular, that people actually know what that means. That's thrown out by people who are associated with coaching, but
it's bandied around an awful lot. I think it is valid. It's a valid term because we've all got belief systems, or BS as I like to call it, in the way that we see the world. Some of them serve us, some of them don't. And if we've grown up believing one thing, and that can be changed.
Can you not make me laugh when I've just taken a drink of water, man?
Sorry, I'm just doing my thing. But I think you're right, Pat. It's a name that's bandied around a lot. So you probably are helping people do that, whether you would call it that or not.
Yeah, but the important thing is, to answer your question a little bit, Phil, getting up there the first time is difficult. It's challenging. You know, there's this there's a grimace there from Neil, because you're frightened, and fear is built on that primeval instinct that we are a risk. We're a risk of death. We're a risk of rejection. from community, and so all those fears are there. But actually, what is the real thing that's going to happen? Most at that level of open, Mike, you'll know, Neil, people are on your side and they want you to do well, and it's getting through it.
Unless it's the Up the Creek comedy club in Greenwich. Apart from that, I would agree with you. That is absolutely brutal.
I remember stories. I never actually went to the Tunnel Club. Did you ever go to the Tunnel Club? Where
no.
It was really bear baiting. The whole point was to attack the comedians, and I think at one point they had a cage.
At this place called Up the Creek, the compere, when it was time for the 5-minute open spot, would pull out a little bell and ring it and go, "What time is it?" And the audience would go, "Dinner time," and then they'd start chanting, "Bring on the Christians." I mean, it literally was bear baiting, but I've played some very friendly.
There's always someone worse off than yourself, I suppose.
One of the friendliest rooms I've played, I'll put it on the screen. It's a whole lot of comedy. We had Elaine Blackmore from Whole Lot of Comedy on here actually once.
And now, Pat, I do have to ask the question. I feel like one or two are also asking this as well. Do you need more omega-3 in your diet, or have you just got a very squeaky chair going on there?
Oh, have I got a squeaky chair? I'll try and sit still.
Okay.
No, it's okay. It all adds to the ambience. It's definitely not me, but you know what? We're not so bothered. So, what's the most common issue you deal with these comedians? Because I mean, got to be confidence, right?
Yeah, it's got to be confidence, and it's about envisaging what's going to happen on the stage. And the most thing that people most worry about is heckling beforehand. But of course, the level that I'm often working is people don't tend to heckle because they're on side of the acts are up. So that's and also because heckle is an offer. It's an opportunity to improvise around it, and the audience is on your side. So there are strategies.
But I don't think I've ever seen one heckle where the person who does the heckling isn't made to look like a prat. I don't mean from the point of view of how the comic responds. I just mean in their own sweet way. As far as I'm concerned, if someone thinks it's acceptable or appropriate to go and watch someone performing on a stage who must be nervous, I don't care how long you've done it, you play to an audience, nerves are going through you. If you think that in the comfort of your chair in the audience, it is acceptable to what is tantamount to bully the person who is in front of you on stage, then I'd say that makes you look like a prat. And I've never thought of it any other way. If someone heckles, they're the ones with the problem, not the comedian. But isn't it strange how it must be a comedian's worst fear to some degree, being heckled?
Well, I think certainly for a novice comedian, because like anything, you don't have a strategy to deal with it in the same. So that's where the fear lies. And talk about confidence. Confidence comes with competence, and the more that you deal with something, so. It's going up there.
We've got to nick that as a phrase of men's radio. Confidence comes from competence. How brilliant is that?
I'm putting that on the screen.
Loving that.
Yeah, I think it's the case. And you ask why you might want to have a coach. Well, a coach is an outside eye, and you ask the question, what is it? I think for me, the best question in coaching is always to start with what's on your mind. Now, I have a client who performed last night and got heckled, and he ended up getting quite angry with the person who was talking, and that's when you've lost, really.
Exactly.
Your job is not to get angry; You've got to raise above.
Because sometimes I've seen the comedians turn it. They just turn it on the person that's done it, and the person that's done it gets absolutely roasted. And if the room's on your side, that's the key thing. If the room is with you and they like you more than the heckler, it's brilliant. One of the most brilliant heckle put downs I ever saw. There was a guy at the front. It was a comedian called Meryl. And she wrote about it in a book, so I can say this freely. And he was just chatty. He wasn't heckling as such, but that kind of annoying one at the front that talks a bit too loudly and thinks it's a conversation, right? So she tried all the standard put downs and it didn't work. So in the break, she went backstage and she found his blog, all right? And reading the blog, it was his wish list. Now he's on a date with this girl, all right? He's got a coat still done up. That's key. And they're sitting there kind of uncomfortable. It was his wish list. One of the things on the wish list was lose my virginity. Now, she went back out on stage and read the blog out word for word. So I don't think,
Fantastic.
given that she kept her coat on for the rest of the night, I don't think that particular one was ticked off his wish list that night, let's just say. But I mean, if that isn't a great heckle put down, I don't know what is. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
One can only begin to imagine the shade of red that he must have gone when that was read out. But at the same time, though, if you put something like that in a blog, one would assume it is actually out there in the ether for others to see. Though, perhaps it was. I did think to myself just now that one shouldn't really underestimate what you do, because in some way, I know that you could sort of say that it's helping someone to be a comedian, to comede, if you like, but actually, it probably goes much deeper than that. I reckon that sort of that what you do probably helps someone in their everyday life as well, because if you go on a stage, confidence for some reason, I sort of think that people have confidence or they don't. And if they've got it to the ability that they can go on stage with, then great. But if they don't, then they maybe don't necessarily have it in everyday life as well. So I dare suggest that actually probably what you do probably helps people in everyday life as well.
Yeah, it does, of course. But, you know, someone going on stage and, you know, again, it's about competence. They become competent at doing that thing, the ones who are beyond the open spot. And obviously my job is to help people get to that point. But people who have done it regularly, you know, to get to a headlining point, it's about 7 years on the circuit, the average sort of expectancy people talk about. So, you know, there's a lot of gigs under. Yeah, that's what the general sort of thing put out.
For the 20-minute highlights, 7 years.
Well, the 20 minutes who can nail it, who can be
it's
a
like
guaranteed.
Really?
Yeah, because you're not just doing the tried and tested material, you're also responding in the moment, you know, so you've got to be able to deliver what you've got and then deal with everything that happens. But in terms of confidence, that person may be very confident at doing what they're doing on stage, but they may be totally unconfident in their dating life or in their relationships outside. So we are all human, and we all suffer from fear and self-confidence issues. And even if you think about it, someone who's headlining or who is packing out the O2 and has got a headline tour, they're still thinking, what am I going to do next year? You know, so confidence is always, you know, I remember a quote from Jonathan Ross, not a comedian, but a very successful presenter, saying that Jimmy Tarbuck, very funny, yes. And Jimmy Tarbuck said to him, it's easy to get up there. It's very difficult to stay there. And I think, you know,
so true. It's actually, I think it's the same with a lot of things in life, though. To some degree, the easy part is the pursuing of the career, but actually sort of making yourself have that longevity and relevance as the world continues to spin, I think is most definitely a massive factor in that. Can we just, by any chance, just quickly sort of catch up on one or two messages that come in, because I'm very aware, I don't want people to think they're being ignored here. Asa Don Brown has said that limiting beliefs is a term also used in the field of psychology. He also goes on to say that he's worked with a variety of artists, including comedians. It's definitely about developing one's self-esteem, self-worth, and perception of their world.
Because there's even a joke about that. Comedians, you know, it's the joke that all comedians are depressed and have self-loathing issues, isn't it? You know, as I say, a lot of them do their material about that, and then they turn it into. I suppose that's healing, because if they turn it into something funny, they're looking at it from a distance and they go, wait a minute, that's not really me. You know,
I suppose it is in some way. It's catharsis, isn't it, really? I suppose to some degree.
So, yeah.
Well, what sparked my interest about your men's radio station, and to be honest, I'd only become aware of it this week, and I think it's great, is that people, it's an opportunity to talk, and men need to talk more, women need to talk more, but in particular, men need to talk more. And yes, I agree with you. When you put yourself on stage, and as I say, in the modern autobiographical era, it is about being vulnerable. It is about sharing your foibles, because, you know, it's a status game. Some things you're going to say where you're observing others and commenting on them and making them the sort of target of the joke. But I think if you don't make yourself a target of a joke at some point, you lose the audience, because they're sort of going, oh, we don't like you. We want to see your vulnerability. So
very much so. Most comedians start with a self-deprecating joke, don't they? Or I'm the love child of. If I don't know, you know, Vladimir Putin slept with someone, and this is what it would look like. You know what I mean, or something like that. The self-deprecation joke. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you go high status all the time above the audience, I mean, it's difficult. I don't know. Some might argue that Jimmy Carr does go above most of the time. I don't know how many jokes are at his expense, but
Well, it's interesting you say that, because actually Sam Monroe comments on that. He's actually used Jimmy Carr as an example. He says Jimmy Carr's put downs can be brutal, but he thrives on it. Yes, they can.
I was watching Jimmy Carr the other day, and my God, I can't repeat it on any radio station, but my God, it was a brilliant film. Absolutely brilliant.
He's a very fruity individual. I mean, it's honestly, some of the things he comes out with, it make me blush, never mind my mother. Dave Sleet, by the way, has also commented. He says that coaching someone is always about the person, not always about the working environment, specifically the working environment. He goes on to say that harnessing the response as quickly as possible so that it shows the strength and the flexibility of their comfort in that space. All of this stuff.
Oh, nicely said, Dave.
Isn't it amazing? But Dave's always been like that. He's so good at sort of just articulating and putting stuff out there. But I have to tell you that I don't think of stuff like this. I mean, as a real layman, when it comes to comedy, I just see it from a point of view of an audience member. I look at it, I see someone get up on stage, they're telling a couple of jokes, making people laugh. I find them funny, or I don't find them funny. I don't think of it any more than that, you know. But it just goes to show that, like with everything in this world, there's a lot of complexities to things.
Yeah, well, you shouldn't think about it as an audience member any more than that, because it's like watching magic. You know, there's a lot of, we don't want to know what the real truth behind the trick is, you know, and having studied comedy for over 30 years, it's very difficult for me to watch it without that scrutiny, and I kind of regret that in a way. I used to love comedians a lot more before I studied it and understood it, and thought, oh, there's a pattern.
It's kind of like a busman's holiday for you, Pat, huh?
Yeah, well, actually, I much
so back to what you were saying earlier in the conversation, Pat. Sorry, we've got a bit of a delay here. Sorry, I'm not talking over you. Back to earlier in the conversation, you said someone comes to you, and the first question you ask them is, "What was it? Was it what's on your mind, or something like that, or what's the?" You said it earlier.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because you know the nature of coaching is finding out what your client is wanting, and you know, so the skills instruction side is universal. You know, stand-up comedy comes down to writing techniques and structures. It comes down to performance techniques and projection of persona. But the mindset thing is universal, and you can respond to techniques, but it's not so dictatorial. You need to actually ask, what is it? Where are you struggling? And that for me relates to the coaching thing that you were talking to with your industry person. I didn't get the name, I'm afraid. I tuned in about the way that coaching is in industry and how that change of a drop-down instruction hierarchical thing about that collaboration. So coaching is a collaboration with the comedian. They come to you and they say, I'm struggling with this, and then you start to ask questions and help them find clarity, because you need clarity.
And sometimes, and I've seen some brilliant coaches do it, sometimes just by asking the right questions, you can see people have breakthroughs straight away. They just need that right question to be asked at the right time in the right way. And I've seen that so many times. I suppose as a coach, when you see that, it must be absolute nectar for you, right?
Yeah, and it's great. I mean, I work with comedians, but as Dave was saying, it's common. I mean, I've chosen to work with comedians because I have some experience in that area, and I've been working in that area for 30 years. But I'm very happy working with anybody. But that's a case of that's a business thing of niching. But yeah, it's universal. You know, things we have struggles with confidence and fears and so forth.
Well, I can imagine what you do is very useful to, say, someone who maybe struggles a bit finding a job, for example. So if you go into, say, a job interview environment, a lot of people find that quite overwhelming, quite intimidating. And yet the truth is that actually it's more often than not, it's a performance. You're going in to meet someone. As long as you sort of got that confidence and that element of sort of performability, if you like, to be able to impress the person on the other side of the desk. I can imagine that sort of a lot of what you do is sort of very much on par with that, and probably help people quite a lot.
Something very fanciful popped into my head. Imagine that life is one big heckle, you know? So you go for the job, and then the heckle, or you could call it the inner critic, goes, rubbish, get off. And like Dave Sleet's
a phrase I'm perfectly used to,
harnessing that moment and responding in the moment, and you can really help people master these, I suppose, difficult, wounded, shadow aspects of ourselves. And I think, you know, talk about being tested in the fires of experience. You know what I mean? Thrown in the deep end on a comedy stage. My God, I hope you like your healing and uptake quick and fast, because that would be thrown in at the deep end for most people.
It would, and It's an interesting thing. I was listening to a communication podcast yesterday, and one of the things they talked about was paraphrasing, and I thought that was really interesting. And so paraphrasing, repeating back what someone says to them, and that's quite a big thing in coaching. So it does a couple of things. It affirms that you're listening to someone, and it also allows you to clarify what's being said, but it also allows you some thinking time. And I think in interviews,
there is it. Now that is you've just hit the nail on the head, because I was going to say, from a broadcast perspective, especially sort of someone who edits and broadcasts and produces broadcasts, when I hear paraphrasing, I just think of, okay, you've got the question, answer now please, because I don't have time to sort of listen to everything that's been said to them repeated. So it's really interesting that you say that actually it's affirmation, it's almost like a sort of a positive connection. It just depends, I guess, in the circumstances where you're at, whether or not it's deemed appropriate or necessary. For me, I think it's sort of utterly unnecessary and just wasting time, but it's extraordinary how you say that, actually.
No, and I thought about that before I came on here, and because I was going to bring this up. But in an interview, it's very useful. But also, politicians use it a lot because they they don't even paraphrase. They do the broadcast bit and move it on to where they want to go. The art of paraphrasing is taking what you said and affirming it. It's really interesting what you said about the cost of living, but really what we should be talking about, and then you take it where you want to go.
So true.
So and you can do that in an
pacing
interview.
And leading, they call that, don't they?
And you can do that in an interview. You can go with set things. I know I'm strong on these three things. I'm going to make sure I talk about those. So whatever they say to me, I'm going to say, that's really interesting. You should ask me about that. But the actual thing that's important is, and then say the thing that you're going to say. So I just thought that was...
and not yes, but. I was taught yes, and not yes, but.
Yes, at the heart of
improvisation. Please. Oh, terrible.
But just to bring it back to heckling, that is the art of heckling. The first thing, art of responding to heckling, you can either, if you can't hear it, you can either then mimic it, and that's, you can just make a back at them, and the audience may laugh at that. But if everyone's heard it, you can repeat it, so make sure everybody heard it, and that gives you some time, and you can say thank you for that comment that's got nothing to do with what I was talking about, and then move on. Now they might do it again, and then you've got to go back to it. But the point is that you keep doing that paraphrase, accept it, acknowledge it, and then move on to what you wanted to say.
Also, I'm sorry, I know this might be going slightly off on it. Sorry, Neil, dealing with a delay, go for it.
Oh, I was going to say, second time round, if someone did that, I would say, no, it wasn't funny the first time, mate. And if you got the room on your side, then it's like that power dynamics, and it's massaging, manipulating those power dynamics that ultimately you make them feel that they're in control, but actually you are. And I suppose another art of it, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, because I was thinking, I feel like sort of like with when it comes to heckling, I know this may be like sort of going off on a slight tangent here, but it's just thought that's cropped into my head. So isn't it funny? So that there are certain situations where we believe behaviors are acceptable, and others where you just absolutely wouldn't dream of doing something. And heckling is a classic example of that. In a million years, it would be very unlikely that someone would walk down the street and start telling them that you're rubbish at whatever you're doing, or that you're badly dressed, or you're boring, go away, move out of my way, that kind of thing. Yeah, okay, maybe people might start a bit of a fight with something or other, but it wouldn't necessarily be in quite the same way and same brutal way that heckling somehow dictates people to do. It's the same kind of thing with social media as well. We've said this loads of times, that the keyboard warrior goes on to social media and is so valiant, so brave, that the fact that they would just sort of go on and say something to somebody on the social media that they wouldn't dream of saying to their face. It's, I suppose, in some weird way, it's kind of like that. They've got the safety of the audience around them to heckle and to start abusing someone that they probably otherwise wouldn't have the backbone or tenacity to do if they saw them face to face.
Yeah, the one other case is where the person actually thinks they are helping the comedian. They're actually thinking, I know this person is good at doing put downs, I'm bowling them one up. So they think they're being the partner in the show, and there's more experience. And more experienced comedians, someone like Jimmy Carr, of course, they're doing that because they want to hear his great put down. They say, I'm willing to be the victim here, so you can say that horrible thing that we all want to hear you say. So,
brilliant. So if people want to get in touch with you for coaching, primarily in comedy, but is it 100% comedy? I'll just clarify that, or would you coach in any area of life, but mainly comedy? What is it?
Well, comedy is my niche, but I'm happy to work in many areas of life. I'm a 56-year-old man who's got a lot of life experiences. We talked a bit about my my relationship with alcohol that I've been addressing in recent months, which is really interesting. I've under my experience of suicide. So there's a few things that we may not talk about today, but they're really close to me and are related to coaching, and actually are relating to comedy quite a lot. So,
well, Pat, there's nothing for it. You'll just have to come back and speak to either Neil, Russ, or me again. It's very simple.
I love the way you slip that in just before the end. You were like, "Oh, we didn't talk about that. We'll have to come back."
Cliffhanger there.
Good timing there, sir. You're good at what you do.
Good cliffhanger.
We'd love to hear that. I mean, because suicide is a terribly important subject, and anything we can share to, stop it, even better. And of course, alcohol is something that affects an awful lot of people as well. So we'd definitely love to have you back. But in the meantime, if people would like to get in touch, website under construction, but go to Facebook and type in Pat Welsh. It's on the screen. Or you can get in touch with Pat at thepatwelsh@gmail.com. Thank you for being on, Pat. Have a great weekend, buddy.
Thank you very much for having me, and you
Thank
too.
you. Bye-bye.
You're welcome.
There we
Thanks
go.
for being on.
Marvelous stuff. Let's have a quick quick catch up on some of those messages that are coming in, because I'm aware that we are not necessarily getting to them. So hold that thought. Let's have a look and see what we've got here. We have got Sen says that for me as an actor, you feel and you know what you want to be doing and what you are doing. It's something within you that drives you forward. The first few times are the hardest, but you know you want to do it. You can't explain it, but when you do get out there and people laugh at a joke, especially one that you have written yourself, the payback is wonderful. It feels like validation and spurs you on to do more. And I think that what Sen is doing is he was responding to earlier. Do you remember we were saying about how it seems strange that someone who's not necessarily in a best position to go and be a comedian would therefore go off and choose that as a career path. So I think that that's what Sen was saying. He also goes on to say,
really,
by the way,
interesting this. Oh, go on. Sorry.
No, I was just to say that as a sub message, he just says affirmation is all important. You want people to like you and what you're doing. So,
which makes this even more interesting from Asa Don Brown, who is very involved in the psychiatric community in the USA. And by the way, we read these messages out because Deluxe Radio, people listening on there, they can't see us, they can only hear us, in case you wonder why we read the messages out. Asa Don Brown says, Sen Munro, absolutely. I feel this way about all of my work. Yet, and this is really important, over the years, I've learned that your validation must occur internally. So true. The more that we're capable of doing, the less that we seek this outwardly. Because too much, and I'm sure you'll agree with me on this, and correct me if I'm wrong, sir, too much is just basically people-pleasing, and that doesn't work, or rescuing, and that doesn't work either, whether in real life or on the comedy stage. It's not only helped my patients and clients, but it's helped me along my own journey in this life. Yes, I heard a lovely phrase about this, and it was that, the universe, if you like. In other words,
I love that.
It all begins with, it starts with us, and you're right, the less validation you need from the outside, the better you feel, the more you can do, the more you can have, and the more you can give. It's a paradox, isn't it? But
well, you know, Longy, you are absolutely right, sir. It starts with us, but it concludes with the lovely Chantal Rickards, who is very patiently waiting.
What a segue! My
did
God,
you see what I did there? Do you see what I did there?
You should be in broadcasting, dude.
Thank you very much indeed. How very kind. Chantal Rickards, how the devil are you?
Really good indeed. It's lovely to see you. Sorry that we haven't got our leader with us today, but anyway, we'll struggle on without him.
We'll muddle through, but let's ensure that we have the rose amongst thorns. And what we will do is, we will
conversation. I mean, really fascinating.
I thought it was a really interesting conversation because obviously, so Chantal, you must have stumbled across people in your career who obviously confidence may be in an abundance, or it may be that actually they hide behind the screen in order to feel that they have some validation in this world. I think that we know exactly the kind of people talk about where they have to go on screen in order just to sort of, I suppose, to get words out. Sometimes they're so quiet off screen.
Absolutely. I mean, and that is where they get their validation. They get it from other people, which is really interesting, that when you flip it on its head, is actually you've got to self-validate first, and probably you'll be a better human being if you've gone that way round than the other way round. But I mean, comedians are quite fragile people, I think.
I don't think there's any probably about it. I completely agree with you, Chantal. Because people can spend their whole life seeking validation from the outside world. People do it in relationships, and if you're on the screen or stage, that magnifies it even more, I would have thought. So it's even more important for people to, you know, start with your universe, if you like. I loved your recommendation. It was recent, wasn't it, for Bank of Dave?
Can I just say, before we get into that, we have to do this properly. Neil, I'm sorry. You know, there is a proper introduction here. So when we start talking about all things silver screen and indeed, well, the smaller screen, well, we have to do this. Indeed, we do. There you go. So we love TV. And of course, anyone who's actually sort of got some sort of rather, should we just say, very clever ears, they may note that, of course, that is a theme tune from back in the 80s of a TV show from Gloria Hunniford, funnily enough, called We Love TV.
Yeah. Indeed, I remember it well. And the lovely Gloria Hunniford, who isn't much on our screens anymore, but she was an absolute delight to work with when I worked with her in the 80s and 90s. Incredibly nice.
She seems such a lovely person.
Yeah. And in fact, on this morning, her daughter was
lovely, because I bumped into her once just outside Selfridges, and I'm not ashamed to say this. Okay, I was slightly in awe. I don't really get starstruck that often, but there are some people in this world that you meet, and I just think, oh my goodness, you're such and such. Gloria Hunniford was certainly one of them. Anywho, what I decided to do was that I thought to myself, well, I definitely do want to get something in the way of, should we say, an autograph, which I don't often do either. But the only thing I had to hand was a copy of the Metro. So I took the Metro newspaper and I said, I'm terribly sorry to do this. Is there any chance that you might be prepared to sign this for me? And you know what? She was perfectly amenable. She did do it. She could have very easily have said, I'm not in work. Do you mind if I don't? She didn't. She was lovely.
Oh, well, I'm very pleased to hear that. Jolly nice. Good. A nice story. Well, I was very briefly going to tell you about not the only time I was heckled. I was heckled quite a lot in Hollywood because I was always making speeches and people were always terribly disrespectful. But actually, one of my first speeches I was making to a crowded room of 200 or 300 people, big agents in Hollywood who'd all come along. But one of them had brought Rob Lowe with them. Mm-hmm. And I hadn't seen Rob Lowe arriving, so I didn't actually know he was there. And then suddenly in the middle of my speech, I was, a couple of minutes in, I suddenly heard this voice heckling me and my eyes went across the audience and it was Rob Lowe, and I just thought, I've died and gone to heaven. He can heckle me any day of the week and I will have been a very happy woman because of it. Anyway, there we are. That's my heckling story. But I didn't have.
So you didn't have a witty
no, because I got
to throw back at him.
It was that starstruck moment. You don't expect Rob Lowe to be heckling you from the audience.
Now,
by the way, for the benefit of those tuned in, we do have a slight echo going on today. So if it sounds a little chaotic, there's a slight echo delay, and with three of us, it sounds all a little bit weird. So we're not deliberately talking over each other.
No. So we do it just because we're egotistical maniacs. But even so, but Neil,
don't talk over me while I'm talking over you. It's my show.
This is normally my show. But, yes, I was going to say, I did interrupt you. I did interrupt you before. You started talking about Bank of Dave, Neil, but what was it about? Because I have to tell you, I couldn't get into it. I tried. I really tried, but it wasn't me.
No, it had the feel-good. It's a feel-good British movie. It's got the uplifting factor of the Full Monty, for example, except no male nudity. I didn't realise till afterwards it was Roy Kinnear's son who played the list until I saw the credit. I'm like, oh, Rory Kinnear, what a fantastic actor, and what a beautiful and true story. And Def Leppard, what's not to like?
No, it was jolly good. We had a quick chat about it last week, I think. And for those that didn't hear us, the bit about Def Leppard wasn't true. It was great in the film, but actually it was a little bit of dramatic license. Anyway.
Oh, somebody do a concert for them?
No. Sorry about that.
Well, it was still a good film.
Yeah, Chantel, what has caught your eye this week? What do we need to be looking out for?
Yes.
Well, BBC have played a blinder and brought out, I think, a really good 6-part series about the biggest heist in the UK, which was the Brinks Mat gold bullion heist in 1983 when I was just starting my career in London. And I don't really remember it, to be honest, but there have been lots of documentaries about it and lots of films about it. And in fact, lots of TV shows before. But I think this is absolutely, definitely the best. So Hugh Bonneville plays the character of Detective Inspector Boyce, who is after the bad guys. And the sort of chief bad guy is played by Dominic Cooper, who's a very, very clever actor. And it's a sort of cat and mouse over 6 episodes, 6 one-hour episodes, incredibly well written. I think everybody's going to enjoy it because it really explains everything in a very logical way. So the whole thing was a bit of a mess to start with because the 6 robbers who went in thought that they were going to find £3 million worth of foreign currency. In actual fact, what they found was £26 million worth of gold bullion. Well, one you can carry out easily and one you can't. And one you can, sort of move it around very easily. And the other is incredibly heavy and has to be smelted to put into some form whereby you can sell it into the black market system. And then it comes out of the gold bullion system at the other end. So actually an awful lot of the story is about how they got rid of the gold bullion, half of which was never found. So that it's now worth between 90 and 100 million, they think, is what it's now worth.
Here's what worries me slightly with stuff like this, is that as much as I know it's a drama, we all know it's made up and stuff like that, but do you ever worry that this could act as something in the way of inspiration to others if they start revealing how these crimes were carried out? Because it was the same with all of the fuss around the Hatton Garden debacle. It just makes me concerned that it gives people ideas. I'm not saying that everyone would act on it, but there are some out there who are twisted enough to say, oh, that's a good idea.
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's a very good thought. I mean, the flip side is that a lot of them went to jail, so it might be quite
it might be a bit off-putting.
A bit of a deterrent. But I'm not really sure. I mean, I think it's such a good story. And inevitably, there's a big question mark around where one's moral compass is and what makes a person turn to crime. And, that maybe is through the fact that they're plain greedy or that they are impoverished or that they are desperate. And that's psychology behind criminality, I think, is completely fascinating. It's not really addressed here, to be honest. You see the head guy, Dominic Cooper, as really having no moral compass at all. And that's quite interesting. But the other ones, you do really feel some affinity with, especially the one person who gets off, who you don't really expect to get off at all. Anyway, it's a really good 6-part series and it's worth watching. But I mean, there is something, a whole thing about criminality and what drives men particularly more towards crime than women.
What's it called again, this series?
It's called The Gold. I mean, very simply, The Gold. But it's BBC One. It's on the iPlayer. It's a 6-part series. I'm sure it'll travel around the world. It's the sort of thing that will be easily picked up in overseas territories as well.
Yeah.
So worth watching. And for those watching in America, of course, BritBox is on in the US and is half ITV and half BBC. But quite a lot of the new BBC stuff goes out on BritBox. So that's where you might find it in the States.
I did not know that. Interesting. Okay, excellent stuff. I mean, I have to say that BritBox and me did not get on. I tried it twice and I couldn't get on with it. So, but if it makes it accessible in America, then great. What else have we stumbled across?
Okay, so I want to talk about somebody I had never really heard about until a couple of months ago. Rather like ChatGPT, which if you haven't got there yet, you'll get there because it's very zeitgeist at the moment. But this was a name I didn't know of somebody called Andrew Tate.
Oh dear.
And if okay, so I think you know who he is then by the sound of it. But he's an extraordinary. For those that don't know, he's half American, half British. He grew up in Luton. He's a young man of 35 whose shtick, if you like, is very much about being very alpha male, aggressively alpha male, that women have a place and it's in the home. They shouldn't be driving. They should, be there for their men and not have careers, which doesn't really cut it with me, let me tell you. But this
Oh, you
man,
amaze me, Chantal. I mean, all of your success. Are you telling me you wouldn't have rather given it up to just stay at home and just do the cooking and the washing?
No,
possibly not.
unreal.
I can't understand it.
But this young man, because this is a documentary about him, and the documentary is entitled The Dangerous Rise of Andrew Tate. He has become an internet phenomenon around the world. He's had, I think, 11.5 billion hits on his Instagram.
Oh my God.
He has, rather like Trump had at one stage, something called a university, which has got, I think, 170, I checked it out this morning, 170,000 young male followers who are paying $50 a month to be part of this group where he pushes
and
forward.
he has an affiliate program as well, doesn't he? So if people join and they sign someone else up, they get, so it's basically financially incentivizing people to join up. I mean, it's a good business model, I'll give him that, but that's about the only good thing.
Well, look,
it's called Hustler's University, you know, and actually what he stands for is not great stuff, besides the fact that what this documentary uncovers, and it's a documentary made by an American news organization called Vice, but it's on BBC, so you'll find it on the BBC iPlayer, but in the US, you'll find it on the Vice network and on YouTube.
You see, it's really, but I think, sorry, Chantal, I was just going to say that Andrew Tate is a classic, and I'm very aware, obviously, that he's not here to answer anything. So I'll be very careful with what I say with this. But I think he's a classic example of why my opinion that all opinions should be heard and should be welcomed to some degree is so important. Look at the following that Andrew Tate has managed to garner and has managed to accumulate over however long he's been doing what he's been doing. Without almost sort of going unnoticed because it's been suppressed underground. If these conversations were had openly and honestly in the mainstream, all that would happen is people would be reminded how abhorrent some views can be, suppress them, push them down. And this is the danger of the day and age in which we live, where people say, no, we don't talk about that on this platform. We don't say this on here because it's not on our agenda. It's ridiculous. Unfortunately, all that has happened is he has proven that if you suppress something, it goes underground and it swelters, and it's really worrying.
Yeah. His review,
and when it has, and also if it's underground, it has a certain exciting tabooness about it, doesn't it? It's like when your parents don't want you to do something, makes you want to do it even more. It almost that. But for me, I've seen the documentary, Chantal, and the way these men were being brainwashed. And it was a kind of brainwashing, and I found that very disturbing, and it just really made me think how. Of the importance of what we were talking about earlier, about starting with yourself, knowing your own values and who you are, not trying to emulate someone else. By all means, enjoy pretty girls and fast cars. I don't have a problem with that. But if you think that's going to make you happy and be the be all and end all and everything, and it makes you better than else in the world, nah.
Yeah.
But more importantly, Neil, though, enjoy it as long as there is a mutual enjoyment. This is the whole thing.
Yes, and yes. Thank you. And I should have said that as well. And I completely agree with you. Yeah, the objectification is absolutely hideous. Absolutely hideous. In my humble opinion.
Teachers seemingly are seeing the behaviour of boys in the classroom who come in with this sort of swagger and this attitude, and a lot of it seemingly is being linked back to them watching these rather extreme videos of him throwing his weight around and being very blokish. I mean, he came on the scene here. He was a cage fighter, for those that don't know, a kickboxer, then a cage fighter. He was picked up by Big Brother in 2010. That completely passed me by. I had no idea he'd been on Big Brother. And that propelled him into the mainstream, if you like. But anyway, it's an extraordinary documentary. Again, I think sometimes we have to talk about these documentaries that are difficult, and they are not, the content is quite hard to watch because the man is just ludicrous in the extreme. But it is stuff, as you say, Phil, we've got to be aware of this. I was only really aware of this man when I saw on the BBC News all these, I think 30 Lamborghinis and Porsches were taken out of a warehouse in London and all taken into lockup. Anyway, he and his brother are currently in prison or being held on remand in Romania. And we will see where the tale takes us. But it's a fascinating documentary about somebody I simply knew nothing about 2 months ago, but has become incredibly well known very fast.
And just remind us what it's called and where it's at.
It is called let me just go back to The Dangerous Rise of Andrew Tate. And it's on the BBC, but it was made by Vice, which is an American production news organization. So you'll find it in the US as well, on the Vice network or on YouTube.
Yeah,
it's just
Vice do some good stuff, actually.
45 minutes. It's worth watching.
It also sort of makes
if difficult.
It also makes me think as well of just the. How can I put it? That when sort of something uncomfortable comes along, burying our heads in the sand is all well and good, but it doesn't tackle the problem. But I feel like sort of the biggest issue that we face in this day and age is that people want to achieve zero. They want to absolute everything. Even from something along the lines of, say, and I know this is not the subject, but I'm just giving this as an example. For example, the mere fact that we have a climate, a change towards climate attitude called net zero, right? Obviously, sort of achieve carbon zero. There are also sort of the attitudes that people have when it comes in, say, parts of China, where they want to have a zero COVID policy. So when it comes to conversations, people want to eliminate misogyny. The truth is, you're never going to eliminate racism. You're never going to eliminate misogyny. You're never going to eliminate COVID. You're never going to eliminate all of these different things. And I feel as though that if people actually started getting a grip on that and realize that the way that you deal with this is changing the sort of the swingometer, if you like, those who are in the middle ground, who can be influenced one way or another, just work with them and ensure that you keep on top of their mindset and make them realize why certain people who are on another end of a scale on certain topics and matters are probably not the kind of people you want to follow. Burying your head in the sand is not going to help that.
Yeah. I think a lot of the platforms have tried to cancel him, but all his followers keep popping up and sort of reseeding all of this material. So anyway, it's an interesting watch. It might not be up your street.
I asked myself an interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed. Enjoyed's not the right word. I found it shocking, but I appreciated it. And I asked myself an interesting question, Chantal, because I'm 54 now. Had I been 24 and seen that, would my response have been different? But I think even going back to in my 20s, I was a bit more blokey, but I still wouldn't have gone down that route. I just wouldn't. Just wouldn't. It's just there's just something really pungent and unpleasant about it, in my opinion, and it's just not.
But hang on a second though, Neil, but you say that in your 20s, you're probably thinking of when you were in your 20s as opposed to someone in their 20s now. Do you see what I mean? That maybe the attitudes have changed.
Very much so.
And that's maybe where the issue lies. So I don't think it's, because I agree, if I was in, say, teens or early 20s, I don't think I would have necessarily have gone down that route either. But that's because they're very much sort of, I didn't grow up in a world where social media just influenced every single thought. And that's why I consider myself quite measured now. Some might say otherwise. I consider myself quite measured to be able to say, well, no, actually, this is not a reality. And therefore, I'm not going to take any notice of it.
Yes, indeed.
Chantal, let's not depress ourselves too much. What else have you got?
Okay, so I'm really going to take you in the direction you're hoping I won't take you. But I found a great documentary. It really is worth watching. It's uplifting as opposed to being depressing, personally, I think. And it's a documentary that has been made for Channel 4 television by Prue Leith, who people will know the cookery writer and as the presenter of the Great British Bake Off, which has appeared on television for many, many years now. And her son is a Tory MP called Danny Kruger. And the two of them are on either side of the assisted dying debate. So they've gone off on what the programme is entitled Prue and Danny's Death Road Trip, to go around the world to find out how this issue of assisted dying is tackled. Prue Leith is very pro assisted dying. She wants to be able to finish her life if she has an illness that is unbearable and she's in pain. She wants to be able to finish her life on her terms. and her son, who is in Parliament.
Wait till Channel 5 buys out the Bake Off. That will help.
Oh dear.
So,
Well,
allegedly.
her son is on the parliamentary committee to review assisted dying and is absolutely 100% opposed to his mother's feelings. He thinks there is absolutely no way that this should ever be legalized in any way. 77% of people in this country now, the latest polls say, they feel that assisted dying should be allowed. So it's amazing, actually, that this bill hasn't gone through Parliament and hasn't been agreed, because it is what most of the country want. And clearly, we're not going to force people into it who don't want to participate. But the documentary is just a 1-hour documentary. And because it's mother and son, and she is 81 and he is 47, and their relationship is so solid, they can have these really serious conversations that we can be part of. And I think it was totally enlightening, and it's a great piece of documentary making. It came out this week on Channel 4, and I think it's really worth watching.
But actually, it goes back to what we were talking about now, and having these conversations openly and honestly, you know.
I've wrestled with this one over the years, and I think it's true because, and this is just my opinion, I'm not saying this reflects the views of MRS at all, but if a beloved pet is in terrible pain, we can euthanize that pet and put it out of its pain. It seems the most humane thing to do. But if our beautiful grandma is, then she kind of has to suffer. And I don't see the logic in that. I don't see the logic in that. I can understand why it's hard to legalize, because people are going to abuse it. Of course, that's the fear. Of course. But in my heart of hearts, that's actually what I think, for what it's worth. I really do.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people do, because what that does is that leads to conversation where a lot of people say that we wouldn't treat our pets like this. So why do we treat each other like it? But at the same time, I suppose one has to think along the lines of that a pet is a dependent, a relative has their own life. And that's something very different. So there is a counter to the argument. I get the counter to the argument, but I'm more with you, Neil. If I'm honest, that's the way I feel about it, because I just think it's so abhorrent that we're sort of supposedly in a day and age where more than ever we're aware of people's feelings and if they're suffering or anything like that, and yet we don't do anything to help them.
I think humane first and foremost, and it's the most, what would be the most humane thing to do. And I'm not saying it would be an easy decision. Far from it. I don't even know if I could make it on behalf of someone else, even if I did have the legal right to do so, power of attorney or whatever it was. Difficult one.
Chantal, just remind us the name of that particular documentary, and it's on Channel 4, you say?
Prue and Danny's Death Road Trip.
Marvelous stuff. Have you got any quick fire suggestions for us? Quick
fire, new cop drama on ITV that's just come out. I've only seen the first 2 episodes, but it's looking rather good. It's a crooked cop. A woman from the, I think, Indian community in Leeds is a copper, but she has had a 20-year relationship with the local drug lord. And there is a moment at the beginning of episode 1 where she reevaluates her whole life, and she decides she has to make change. So I probably don't need to tell you more than that. But I think
she becomes a drug addict. I'm joking. We don't know. But anyways.
No, worth watching.
Excellent. What's that called?
That's called Better. I'm sorry, I didn't mention it.
That's
it's right. ITV, I think, 6-part drama, and it's called Better.
Marvelous stuff. Any others? We've got time for one more quick fire, I think.
Oh, if you want something sort of light, Hilary Swank, who's an Oscar-nominated actress, is now appearing in a television series called Alaska Daily. She's a journalist. She's sort of lost her reputation in New York City. She goes to Alaska as a sort of disgraced journalist. She gets involved in everything that's going on. Alaska is an extraordinary country anyway. State, it's, I think, only got 750,000 people, but it is the largest state in America.
And if, of course, in any sort of doubt, if you're unsure of the answer to a question, Alaska. Now, just very quickly, what's the name of Sully?
It's called Alaska Daily, and it's on the Disney network. Disney
Marvelous stuff, Disney Plus. Chantal, thank you so much indeed. We really appreciate it as
ever.
It's
been a while, Chantal, because I just generally do Mondays and Wednesdays, so it's lovely to see you again.
We shall hopefully see you same time next week. Chantel, thank you so much. And have yourself a good weekend. Bye-bye. There we go. That's marvelous, Chantel. Well, Longy, it's been a pleasure.
Phil, it's been a pleasure, dude.
That went very quickly, you know. Normally drags when Russ is on, but anyway. So
Can I just show something very quickly on screen? We had a guest last week called Tosh Britton, who wrote this book, Kindness for Conflict. So she's just sent me this copy, Kindness for Conflict, and you can see her on the back there. The lovely Tosh Britton, who was our guest last week. Recommend this because she is an absolute angel on earth. That one.
Neil, you're back on Monday from midday. Join him and Russ then. Have yourself a great weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.